Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching how the Ottomans defeated the last Crusade, Nicopolis 1396, by kings and generals. So this is part 8 of their series on the rise of the Ottoman Empire. Last time we saw a rare Ottoman defeat at Rovina, but it did not prevent their continued expansion. However, we ended with Hungary, a rather powerful country at that time, calling for a crusade against continued Ottoman expansion. I guess we'll see today how they managed to handle some of these increasing challenges to their reign. Now, before we get into this one, I'd appreciate it if you guys would leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. Now, with all that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
In the year 1396, one of the largest allied armies medieval Christendom had ever assembled was mobilized and ready to march upon the House of Osman.
Alright.
The fate of the Ottoman presence in the Balkans, and perhaps the empire as a whole, was on the line. In this episode of our series on the history of the Ottoman Empire, we will cover one of the most critical military engagements in Ottoman history, the Battle of Nicopolis, the crowning achievement of Sultan Bayezid I, the Thunderbolt.
You know, we've talked about throughout this Ottoman expansion that, look, the Ottomans, of course, have faced challenges and rivals, but they've been little more than speed bumps in the road. We did see a Ottoman defeat last time, right? That is pretty rare. The challenges are sort of ramping up as they go. So far, once again, I'm not saying their expansion has been uncontested. That would be incorrect, but the Ottomans have been extremely dominant in Anatolia and in the Balkans, right? But now they're facing a serious, significant challenge, right? The biggest they've faced yet, right? Sort of the forces of Christendom, marshalling around Hungary in particular, are coming together to try and push out the new power in the region, right? The Ottomans have really established themselves in the Balkans, and the other neighboring powers, they want them out of there because they're sort of expanding in, well, opposite directions. They're clashing, right? This is the issue. So now the Ottomans, they've got some real rivals, some real challenges to face, but they have been dominant so far.
If you want any chance of getting a cool name like that, you better start by looking the part, and we've got an offer to help. This video is sponsored by Ridge, who bring you the Ridge Ring. This is a premium ring built with modern technique.
And as usual, I'll let this ad play through. You can check out Kings and Generals' video. It's linked in my description down below. Go give them a like, subscribe to their channel, check out their sponsor, etc., etc. Basically show them support for making these fantastic videos. So I'll let this play through.
Comes with a dual band silicone ring for a comfy casual alternative. But perhaps best of all is the fact that if you lose your ring, or if you change weight and need to get it resized, Ridge will do that for you for free twice. Yes, with Ridge you don't need to be a sultan to get premium goods and premium customer service, and we're going to make it even better with a discount code. Use code KINGSANDGENERALS at ridge.com/kingsandgenerals to get 10% off. Add a little sophistication to your fingers with the robust and stylish Ridge ring, a ring for life. Go to ridge.com/kingsandgenerals. 2 years after initially declaring the anti-Ottoman Crusade, King Sigismund of Hungary was finally ready to face the forces of the Thunderbolt. During the late summer of 1396, the Crusader army paraded out of Buda and began their march south alongside the left bank of the Danube. Knowing that he could not supply his
By the way, you can see that expansion of both powers that I've been talking about, right? When I said they've been expanding in opposite directions, I meant one's been expanding south, one's been expanding north, so they've actually been expanding into the same space, right? Hungary, it's this growing power, pretty influential in Central and Eastern Europe in this era. As you can sort of imagine, it is moving southwards into the Balkans, deeper into the Balkans. Whereas the Ottomans, right, they have come from the south, right? They started in Anatolia, they moved sort of eastwards, northeastwards, into the Balkans, and so they are expanding northwards, right? And so, no surprise, these two countries are now clashing. It is in the interest of the Hungarians to get the Ottomans out of there, right? So they can have less contest when they're trying to take more of this territory.
large army in one spot for any length of time, the Hungarian king opted for a more mobile solution, the preemptive invasion of Ottoman Bulgaria. This would be the first phase of his anti-Ottoman crusade, as re-establishing Christian rule in the region would serve as a buffer to his kingdom against Ottoman aggression. After taking Bulgaria, the Crusaders likely planned to move further south.
Right, well, it's not only, of course, that they're expanding into the same territory, but it's also, like they just pointed out, that as the Ottomans keep moving further northwards, and, as I said, dominant, are taking all this territory, some of these other countries a little deeper into Europe, like Hungary, are starting to worry, wait a minute, are the Ottomans eventually gonna come up to us? Are they gonna try and fight us, take us down? Or are you gonna be next on the chopping block? And I'm sure they felt that they could win that war, but the point is, they can see the threat pulling closer and closer, and they want to preemptively take it out before it comes to that, right? They want to maintain that buffer area between them and the Ottomans, rather than having the Ottomans right up on their doorstep, which is sort of the case as it's been developing.
And lift the blockade of Constantinople. Alongside the main Crusader contingent heading south, a smaller eastern contingent was sent through Transylvania into Wallachia to restore Mircea I to his throne. Capturing the region would give Sigismund control over the northern bank of the Danube, which would play an essential role in his future invasion of Ottoman Bulgaria. Meanwhile, the Crusader fleet supplied by Genoa, Venice and the Knights Hospitaller had begun their naval operations in the Aegean Sea, resulting in the harassment of Ottoman shipping in the region. In addition to these developments, the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits were also blocked by the Crusader navy, thus permanently cutting off Bayezid from his Anatolian holdings.
I mean, you can really see, especially where each of these powers gets involved, where their interests lie. Right? You've talked a lot about Hungary and what their interests were. Now we can talk about some of these Italian sailors, right? These Italian city-states, they've got very lucrative trade deals, trade routes throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, running through Byzantine territory. As you can see, they even control some of the land in this area, that most of it's been pinched from the Byzantines, actually. So, we've talked about this before, but the Byzantines have not always found allies among the Western Latin Christian powers. In fact, sometimes they found enemies. But when it's convenient to those powers, they come in, oh, we're here to help the Byzantines, etc., etc. These are not necessarily true friends. Everyone's looking out for their own interests, but that's why these guys are here, right? They want to make sure they can keep the Byzantines in control of Constantinople, the very reduced Byzantines at this point, so they can maintain control over some of these trade routes and maintain control over some of these territories that they've conquered, right? They're probably beginning to worry, the Ottomans have pushed so far in every direction, probably some of my land is going to be next.
After Constantinople was resupplied with goods and additional troops, a small contingent of the Crusader navy sailed into the Black Sea and then into the Danube River to rendezvous with the main Crusader army. Back in the west, the main Crusader army under Sigismund crossed into the lands of Bayezid's vassal, the Tsardom of Vidin, through the coastal town of Oshova. After spending 8 days crossing over the Danube, the army found itself at the gates of the regional capital of Vidin. Seeing that a large Crusader army was at his gates, and witnessing the death of a Bulgarian monarch at the hands of Bayezid the previous year, Tsar Ivan Stratsimir of Vidin opened the gates of his kingdom to the Crusaders.
Yeah, the Bulgarians, they've been under some form of domination for a while now, right? Whether more or less explicit, whether it's been direct rule or as a vassal. But we have seen a lot of resistance from the Bulgarians, right? Sort of continuous rebellion, continuing to fight back. Now, the Ottomans keep putting it down, right? So they've not been having a great time, but they have continued to fight back, though there have been periods of just sort of pledging themselves to the Ottomans, saying, I think we were beaten this time. So it's no surprise that given the opportunity, they would sort of join the fight.
What followed would be the massacre and imprisonment of the local Ottoman garrison in the capital town. During the aftermath of the bloody event, Stratsimir resupplied the Crusader army and gave Sigismund free passage into Ottoman Bulgaria through his realm. While the main Crusader army began its operations in the local region, the smaller Crusader force marching into Wallachia had also secured some gains of its own. The forces of the pro-Ottoman Wallachian usurper Vlad I had been pushed back into the eastern portions of Wallachia.
While also seeing a lot of power struggles among the Wallachians, right? Remember, when we talk about this Ottoman domination, it's not always, in fact, it's not usually the Ottomans coming in and replacing everyone with their own people. That's not really how they operate, right? They come in and they try to find allies among the existing ruling class. Right? They may send in a garrison of Ottoman troops, send in some Ottoman administrators perhaps, but they're very much relying on sort of collaboration from the local ruling elite. And so you'll see situations like this, where you've got the crown shifting from one head to another, depending on who holds the upper hand in that moment.
While Mircea I regained his capital of Cotir de Argeș. This gave the Hungarian king access to large sections of the northern bank of the Danube, which would be vital in resupplying his vast mobile host, which marched on the opposite bank of the river. However, despite these early successes, not all would go as intended for the Crusader army. Tensions between the Western Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches had been ongoing since the days of the East-West Schism of 1054.
Yeah,
and the
I mean, I've mentioned that a lot of these Western Latin powers were not true friends of the Byzantine Empire. They had been enemies a lot of the time. That stands true for sort of Orthodoxy and Catholicism more broadly. Obviously, they've got a bit of a rivalry. Sometimes they'd work together, but oftentimes they'd be at each other's throats. Oftentimes you have the scenario of sort of the Orthodox East calling for help, particularly the Byzantines, and the Catholic West, the Latin West, perhaps responding to those calls, but sort of taking some Byzantine territory as they go, trying to gain the upper hand as they step in to help.
Fourth Crusade of 1204. Both groups...
Right, and sometimes, like with the Fourth Crusade, the pretenses are sort of dropped, and they just all-out assault Constantinople and steal a bunch of stuff.
Often saw the members of the opposing church as untrustworthy, and in some cases heretical, on par with Muslims.
Whoa.
These sectarian tensions between the members of the two churches would rear their ugly heads during Sigismund's crusade. In the days following Vidin's submission, Crusader forces fanned out across the countryside of the Tsardom and plundered the region indiscriminately. As the main Crusader army marched west alongside the Danube, they arrived at the strongly fortified town of Oryahovo. Seeing that the odds were heavily against them, the local Ottoman garrison of the town offered King Sigismund terms of surrender in return for their lives, and the lives of the Muslim populace of the town. The Hungarian king accepted the offer, as he had plans for the region after the Crusade. However, after the surrender of the town, the Franco-Burgundian element of the Crusader army, in an act of open defiance, disregarded the terms of peace. The local Ottoman garrison was massacred, alongside the town's Muslim and Eastern Orthodox populace, much to the horror and frustration of Sigismund.
Yeah, so once again, we see the clashing of those interests, right? Some of these, especially the further western contingents of this force, they might not have many long-term interests in this region. They're sort of here to kill and loot and conquer, as they are doing here. Sigismund, right, Hungary, he's sort of neighbor to this region. He has definitely got longer-term interests. In fact, he'd probably like to expand his influence, perhaps even his rule, right? And so, first of all, he'd rather not massacre the civilian population of these places that he intends to spread his influence over. Additionally, there may be some part of course, this has already incredibly antagonized the Ottomans, but he'd maybe rather not antagonize them to the nth degree, you know what I mean? Maybe try and work out some sort of post-war settlement, right? Because he's essentially got an eye towards a longer-term future, given where he's positioned. But some of the contingents of this crusading force, they don't really have that same perspective.
Despite the internal religious tension bubbling up within his army, King Sigismund continued towards the Ottoman fortress town of Nicopolis. In the year after its capture, the former Bulgarian capital had been strengthened with new fortifications, and a well-supplied garrison led by Ottoman marcher lord Doğan Bey. The town stood on a high position overlooking the Danube and had been a vital ferry location for the Ottomans going into Wallachia. According to Sigismund, Nicopolis had to be captured if Christian rule were ever to return to Bulgaria. As a result, during the first weeks of September, the fortress of Nicopolis was put under siege.
I mean, Nicopolis was an important city, of course, sort of historically and especially symbolically for Christianity. Nicopolis is a very important city, but even sort of strategically, militarily, politically, on a more practical level, this is sort of an important fortress city to control the rest of this region, right? So for those reasons, it's a very important city to control if you, once again, want to establish some sort of presence, or at least establish a presence for your vassals in this region.
This time around, the Ottoman defenders stood their ground, for they had most likely heard about the brutal fates of their brethren in Vidin and Oryahovo.
Right, this is another reason, along with, sort of the blatant brutality of it, that you might not want to massacre every city and all the Ottoman soldiers that you come across, because now they're going to hear about it, and there's no shot they're going to let you in. They're not going to try for surrender or, terms of peace. They're going to fight until the end, because they know, well, if we try to make some deal with you, you're just going to massacre us afterwards, like the last garrisons. So why would we do that, right? So that can make it a little harder for you if you're this crusading force to conquer some of these cities, right? Once again, if you're thinking from Sigismund's perspective.
Seeing that Nicopolis would not surrender, the Crusader army constructed siege works and mines over the next few days, while supplies and reinforcements from Wallachia and the Crusader fleet arrived from the Danube. During the Crusaders' advance, the Sultan had been personally overseeing the blockade of Constantinople. Now he focused on the advancing enemy, and
Bayezid's got a couple things to worry about, right? He's a relatively large, expanding empire. He's got sort of conflicts on several fronts, but I think it's becoming pretty clear that the biggest threat is going to be that invasion to the north. I mean, taking Constantinople would be an immense prize, and, well, you can wait a couple decades for that, but in this moment, you do have this encroaching Crusader army marching south deeper and deeper into your territory.
And began mustering forces to confront his foe directly. Seeing that he had to strike the Crusader army before they could gain a significant foothold in Bulgaria, Bayezid gave out orders for his armies in the Balkans, including his vassal Stefan Lazarevich, to gather in Edirne and Plovdiv. The Sultan planned on catching the Crusader army off guard by assembling his army behind the Balkans mountains, far from the prying eyes of Crusader scouting parties, then force marching said army to Nicopolis. In the first weeks of September, Bayezid would leave a small force to continue the blockade of Constantinople, while he and his 20,000-strong Ottoman host began his march north to meet the forces of Sigismund. The Ottoman response to the Crusade would be a swift one. In later centuries, it took an Ottoman army up to 6 weeks to assemble its ranks, and another 3 weeks to travel from Edirne to the Danube. However, completing this journey took the Thunderbolt only 2 weeks.
God damn! Hey, definitely earned his name. He understood the essence of speed, I'll give him that.
Much to the surprise and panic of the Crusaders, on the 22nd of September, Bayezid's host was spotted near Tarnovo by...
Yeah, you can imagine that. They're besieging this all-important city, probably thinking everything's going relatively well, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, with, no in-advance reports, they see this Ottoman army coming towards them. And they go, what the hell is going on here?
by their scouting parties in the region. Only 2 days later, the Ottoman Sultan had established a war camp several kilometers south of Nicopolis. According to Ottoman chronicles, under the shroud of darkness, Bayezid rode to the walls of Nicopolis to inform the local Ottoman garrison of the arrival of his army. The Sultan promised Doğan Bey and his men that come the next day, he would shatter the Crusader army beneath the walls of their fortress.
Whoa.
In retaliation for the sudden arrival of the Ottoman army at Nicopolis, thousands of the remaining Muslim prisoners from Vidin and Oryahovo were rounded up near the Crusader camp and executed. The gruesome struggle for Nicopolis had just begun. Even though they had defeated a minor Ottoman scouting party in the days before Bayezid's arrival, many in the Crusader camp were skeptical about how to approach their current situation. The Crusader host was now stuck between the local garrison of Nicopolis and Bayezid's large host.
Right, this can be a difficult position to be in. Now, if you're Julius Caesar, you just build 2 sets of walls. 1 to keep your enemies in, and 2 to keep your enemies out. But he was a sort of one-of-the-kind kind of guy. In this situation, the issue you're facing is that, of course, you want to maintain the siege of this city, but now you've also got enemies coming from behind. Now, if you take your men and try to fight, a pitched battle with Bayezid, there's always a chance that, relieving the city, some of the men from the city, the garrison, can march out and hit you from behind, right? That's exactly the opposite of what you want to happen. So Sigismund, he's in a difficult situation here.
And worse still, they had the impassable Danube River to their rear. In one swift move, the Ottoman Sultan had managed to besiege the besiegers of Nicopolis.
Right, he's managed to hem them in with the Danube behind them, right? They don't really have anywhere to go, and not only are they hemmed in, but, once again, this garrison that they've been besieging now has essentially transformed into a force behind their ranks, which is really dangerous.
As a result of their situation, a war council was called by Sigismund during the evening of the 24th of September. The decision to face the Ottoman host the following morning was agreed on. However, the Hungarian king advised to take a more cautious approach. He wanted the Wallachian and Transylvanian contingents of his army to head the Crusader assault, as they had the most experience in fighting against the Ottomans.
Right.
After all, the veteran voivode Mircea of Wallachia had defeated Bayezid on 2 separate occasions in the years before the Crusade.
They've got the most experience. They also have the most to fight for. They certainly have more immediate interest than the Hungarians do in reclaiming their own territory. Additionally, if we're honest, Sigismund here is saying, well, why don't I keep my people to the back, and then y'all can sort of go out in the front. Y'all be the first line of attack and defense if it comes to that.
Meanwhile, Sigismund also advised the Franco-Burgundian and Hungarian elements of the army to support the main attack in case of an Ottoman counterattack. This advice fell on deaf ears, as Sigismund's thoughtful strategy was ignored due to internal divisions within the Crusader camp once again resurfacing.
Yeah, you see this a lot. The Crusaders, they tend to have a hard time keeping unified. You've got a lot of these different guys, sometimes with more than sometimes, usually with pretty big egos, all trying to get some sort of honor or loot or glory. They don't want to listen to each other. There are lots of tales of this type of thing throughout all the different crusades, and so it's pretty hard to have sort of a unified chain of command when you've got a bunch of different leaders leading a bunch of different forces who all kind of have their own idea of what to do.
Many Franco-Burgundian leaders were outraged with Sigismund's plan, seeing it as dishonorable to enter battle behind the Wallachians and Transylvanians, whom they regarded as peasants. The Constable of...
Interesting. It's almost the opposite of what I was guessing, where I said, we're trying to protect our own guys. But apparently they saw it as dishonorable. What, you want to put us in the back? No, thank you. We don't want these peasants out there defending us. We will lead from the front. Okay.
France, Philippe of Artois, even accused the Hungarian monarch of trying to steal the honor and glory of the battle for himself. After many hours of shouting and fussing, Sigismund would cave in to the demands of the Franco-Burgundian leaders. Their Western knights,
it seems like these Franco-Burgundians had a lot of influence in this endeavor,
would now head the Crusader assault. During the morning of September 25th, the numerically even Ottoman and Crusader armies deployed for battle south of Nicopolis. On the Crusader side, the mounted Franco-Burgundian knights made up the first line, while King Sigismund and his mainly Hungarian contingent made up the second line behind them. Wallachian troops, led by Mircea, were stationed on the Crusader left wing, while Transylvanian troops, led by Stefan Lachwy, were stationed on the Crusader right wing.
Alright, I guess we'll see how wise this battle formation has ended up being, that Sigismund was sort of forced into accepting. Obviously got, the two armies have a different composition, right? This European army, this Christian army, is far more infantry heavy, whereas our Ottoman force is far more cavalry heavy, right? This is a familiar theme.
A small contingent of Crusaders was left behind to continue the siege on Nicopolis. Unlike their Crusader counterparts, the Ottoman army was far more centralized in its command structure.
Right.
Ottoman Akinji light horsemen made up the front line.
Well, it's because they are essentially entirely under the leadership of Bayezid I. You've got Stefan over here, but, he's got a much smaller force, right? This is mostly a sort of purely Ottoman force, and, our Serbian friends here are going to follow the lead of Bayezid, right? He is unquestionably the one in charge. There's not, maybe there's some squabbling among sort of the officers over strategy, I don't know, but there's certainly no squabbling over who's in charge and who gets to call the shots. And if Bayezid, lays something out, then that's what goes.
While behind them was a mix of irregular light infantry from Anatolia and the Balkans, called Azarbs. Behind them were Bayezid's household troops, also known as the Capiculu, which comprised several thousand elite Janissaries and Capiculu Sipahi heavy cavalry. They were led by the Sultan himself and his Grand Vizier Candilazade Ali Pasha.
We've got our elite troops, our elite infantry, and essentially our elite cavalry. Closest thing you're going to get to Ottoman knights, right? We talk about European knights. Your Sipahi here are sort of your Ottoman equivalent. Though, these are different social classes, different warriors, there's differences, but that's sort of your equivalence if you want to draw one.
They were led by the Sultan himself and his Grand Vizier Candilazade Ali Pasha. Meanwhile, the Ottoman right wing consisted of Balkan Timali Sipahi heavy cavalry, led by the Sultan's eldest son, Suleiman Çelebi. On the Ottoman left wing were the Anatolian Timali Sipahi heavy cavalry, led by Kara Timurtash Pasha. Lastly, on the extreme Ottoman left wing were the mounted Serbian knights, led by their prince, Stefan Lazarevic. In the hours leading up to the battle, King Sigismund sent scouting parties to locate Ottoman positions south of Nicopolis to find the camps Bayezid had concealed from the Crusaders. Due to this situation, the battle was delayed for another 2 hours, much to the annoyance of the Franco-Burgundian element of the army. Soon the waiting became too much for the Frenchmen to bear. Then a battle cry by Philippe of Artois was heard as he seized a banner of the Virgin Mary. "Forward in the name of God and St. George, today you shall see me a valorous knight." Before a general order to advance was given.
Yeah, this guy really not helping the battle preparations. I'm sure Sigismund was incredibly frustrated with the, failure to follow orders on behalf of this Franco-Burgundian force. Of course, once again, this is what happens when you don't have that unified chain of command. You've got this Crusader force. These are all a bunch of different contingents. They technically don't have to listen to each other. It's just in their interest that they do. And I imagine we're going to see what happens when they don't right here.
Franco-Burgundian knights, under their eager commanders, unexpectedly charged forward to seek out the enemy themselves, much to the horror of many senior leaders in the Crusader camp. After some time advancing forward, off in the distance, the Franco-Burgundian line spotted Ottoman Akinji light horsemen scouting their positions. Seeing an opportunity to gain glory on the battlefield, the mounted Western Knights of Europe proceeded to charge into the lightly armored ranks of the Ottoman Akinjis, resulting in heavy losses for the Muslims. With the remaining Akinji retreating back towards the Ottoman camp, and believing they had won a great victory, the Franco-Burgundian mounted knights continued moving forward to make contact with the main Ottoman line. However,
so I do wonder, there's always a question to be asked, right? They come up against this light cavalry, they win this battle, they keep pushing forward. I do wonder if that's what happened, or if the light cavalry sort of intentionally pulled back. Because I think the exact strategy you'd play here as the Ottomans is you send out your light cavalry. Now, they're not going to be a match for these heavy knights you've got, but, these knights with their, glory seeking, they're going to push forward, and if you have your light cavalry continuously pull back, these knights are going to keep pushing. You can draw them into your main force, where I don't think they stand a chance. Maybe I'm wrong, right? I guess we'll see how it plays out. So I do wonder if that was a purposeful strategy, or maybe not, right? I mean, this was sort of a surprise charge, so maybe that Ottoman light cavalry was caught off guard. Either way, I think the effect is going to end up being kind of the same, whether it was on purpose or the Ottomans were genuinely surprised.
As the knights continued riding forward, they encountered a steep slope topped by a forest of sharpened stakes.
Now they're heading up a slope with stakes on it, getting arrow fire rained down on them. Not to mention they're heading straight into this line. On either side of the line, you've got Ottoman heavy cavalry. Like, they're not riding into a situation that is advantageous to them.
Behind the stakes lay the main Ottoman line of Azebs, who were armed with various weapons, such as axes, maces, bows, and spears. Under immense arrow fire from the enemy, many knights dismounted from their horses to get through the Ottoman defences uphill, but many of the Franco-Burgundians were wounded alongside their steeds.
Right.
Despite this, the poorly armoured Azebs were no match against the mighty knights of Europe.
Sure, I mean, this is a very powerful force, but I still think with the rest of the Ottoman army here, I think these knights are in trouble. I suppose their idea is that with their might and training and armor, they can sort of just push through, whether on their horses or not. We're about to see if that works. I don't think it will, but maybe I'm wrong.
And many were killed in hand-to-hand combat. Seeing that this front line was in grave danger of collapsing, Bayezid ordered for his Tamali Sipahi heavy cavalry to hit the flanks of the Franco-Burgundian host, while his Janissaries reinforced the Ottoman front line. This stabilized the Ottoman line, but the fierce, bloody conflict for the slope continued, as the best knights of Western Europe went toe-to-toe with the Sultan's own elite troops. As the battle raged on, King Sigismund's contingent of the Crusader army, made up of infantry, had finally arrived on the battlefield.
I will say, I still don't think it was the smartest move in the world to just charge forward, no orders given. Well, at least no orders from Sigismund. But, the Franco-Burgundian knights, these European knights, they have put up far more of a fight than I expected. I thought they were essentially walking into disaster, if not a trap. But, they've managed to defeat that light cavalry. They took out a significant chunk of the Ottoman line. Now, the Sultan has sent some of his Janissaries and his elite cavalry to take them on, but they have not immediately been crushed. Now, like I said, I still don't think it's a great idea, but they've impressed me, to be honest. I didn't, expect them to hold out for so long under these conditions.
Wanting to prevent the two Crusader contingents from uniting their forces at this critical moment in the battle, the now anxious Bayezid played his last hand. Sending forth his remaining Tamali Sipahi cavalry and the remnants of his Akinji and Azeb units, the Ottoman Sultan ordered the creation of a new battle line to be formed between the two Crusader hosts.
Oh, wow.
Meanwhile, the Sultan's own Kapikulu Sipahi cavalry was sent forward to flank around and charged into the rear of the Franco-Burgundian knights.
Yeah. So this is what I thought was coming, right? They put themselves in a situation where it's very easy to be flanked.
The latter move brought about heavy casualties for the Western Knights, as they were now surrounded on both sides by Bayezid's elite household troops.
But, Bayezid is really, using all the cards in his deck. He's still got Stefan back there, but apart from him, he's using his personal cavalry, his elite troops, so he's pulling out all the stops to sort of gain control of the battlefield once again.
As the battle for the slope continued, the newly formed Ottoman line crashed into Sigismund's contingent of the Crusader army. Although taking heavy losses, the Ottoman line successfully prevented the Hungarian monarch from uniting his forces with the Franco-Burgundians, who were at this point in the battle exhausted after hours of fighting.
Yeah, and I do still think if the Ottomans can essentially deal with these knights here, which I think they can, they're going to win this battle. They've got a massive upper hand. They can wheel both their elite ground troops, the Janissaries, and their cavalry around on this advancing Crusader force, which now is left with primarily infantry and some cavalry left, right? Sigismund's, but they will have lost their force of elite knights, which are pretty essential when you're fighting a battle like this.
Under the burning morning sun, with Sigismund unable to break through Ottoman lines to reach the Franco-Burgundians, panic began to spread in the Crusader army. perhaps seeing
I mean, you can see here in the outcome of the battle how important that unified chain of command is, in that Bayezid, he is able to use his men, sort of, not to sound brash, but in a way, sort of as chess pieces, right? He can play strategy on the battlefield. You know, he can move his cavalry from here to there, right? He can send them in when it's necessary, right? To, stem a break in the line, or to create a new line, or to surround the enemy. Whereas Sigismund, well, his largest force of cavalry charged off without him before the battle, right? And oftentimes cavalry are the closers, right? When you've got two lines going up against each other, it is oftentimes in this era a cavalry charge that ends things, right? And I say in this era, but frankly, broadly throughout military history, cavalry can be the closers that you need in a battle. And so to not have control of your cavalry, especially such an elite cavalry force, is kind of a disaster for Sigismund.
Day was lost, and wanting to preserve their troops for future wars against the Ottomans, both Wallachian and Transylvanian contingents of the Crusader host began to withdraw from the battle.
Damn.
Before long, Sigismund's host was now stranded, and the remaining Franco-Burgundians were surrendering to Ottoman.
Sigismund didn't appreciate that. Some may interpret that as a bit of a betrayal.
Troops in droves. At this critical junction, Bayezid delivered the final blow of the battle. The Ottoman Sultan ordered his mounted Serbian knights, led by Stefan Lazarevic, to charge the flank of the remaining Hungarian army.
This is exactly what I was saying, right? Cavalry can be the closers that end the battle. Bayezid pulled his last remaining card, which was Stefan and his force, and he used them in that way to crash through the Crusader army and defeat them where they stood. And also we're hearing Stefan Lazarevic encounter his Crusader brother-in-law, Nicholas II, and assisted him in escaping from Ottoman captivity. Oh, well, that's nice. Helping out your brother-in-law.
The following Serbian charge would be decisive, as it left many dead on the battlefield, thus resulting in the complete rout of the remaining Crusader army. The remnants of Sigismund's army that survived the Ottoman onslaught made their way up north to the Danube, as Venetian and Genoese ships began preparations for evacuation.
They better hope they can get out of there quickly.
Operations. In full panic, many Crusaders drowned in the deep waters of the Danube, while the Hungarian king barely escaped with his own life as he was pushed into the river before being saved, dragged onto a local fishing vessel by his personal guard.
Jesus.
On his way back to Hungary, Sigismund would place the blame for the Crusader defeat on the Franco-Burgundians, stating that their pride and vanity had cost them the day.
Seems relatively fair, but of course that is the narrative that Sigismund would want to go with, right, to deflect responsibility from himself. But from what we've been shown, that does seem largely accurate. I still think Sigismund, now look, he started the battle off in a bad position, I think, having the besieged city in his rear, the advancing Ottomans in front of him. But if he'd had control of the entire battlefield, of his own men, then I think he would have had a much better chance of winning this battle. In fact, quite a significant chance. But because the Franco-Burgundian knights dashed off without him, that was really sort of a stab in the heart at the beginning of the battle. And, I didn't quite know, but from that point onwards, I think you could sort of see that things were not going to go Sigismund's way.
The Battle of Nicopolis ended in a decisive Ottoman victory, and was the crowning achievement of Sultan Bayezid I's reign. Having suffered a few thousand casualties, the Ottoman Sultan had defeated and scattered a great European Crusader army in a single battle. The following morning after his victory, in retribution for the massacre of Muslim prisoners of Vidin and Oyahovo, the Thunderbolt ordered all those he had taken prisoner in the battle be killed.
So, this is another... We've gone through a lot of reasons why it may not be a good idea in this circumstance to massacre all the Ottoman garrisons and the Muslim civilians of these cities that you come across. Here's another reason for you, right? Add it to the list. We've got many, is that, if you end up on the losing side, well, Bayezid's probably going to take this opportunity to massacre your men, which is what he's doing now.
What followed would be a general massacre of thousands of Crusader soldiers, in which many were stripped of their clothing and decapitated. only a handful of high-ranking noblemen were spared from the onslaught, such as John of Navarre. They were ransomed.
Oh yeah, the Ottomans were set to profit greatly. Yeah, I'm sure they made a lot of cash from ransoming some of these important nobles back to Europe.
Off to their respective European holdings in the following years. The defeat at Nicopolis.
Just imagine being a peasant of some little European principality or duchy somewhere in Western or Central Europe, and you're farming your land, a peasant. The taxman comes by. Yeah, so we're gonna need to levy some additional taxes, and you know not to talk back to him, but you raise the courage, and you're like, why? Come on, man. And he says, yeah, so our lord actually got captured by the Ottomans. He was off fighting in a crusade, so we kind of got to pay a ransom to bring him back. Sorry. And you're like, what the hell, man? Come on. So, they're paid a lot of money to get these guys back.
This caused a wave of shock around Europe, as for the first time, the wider continent was personally made aware of the impending threat of the Ottoman Sultanate. It would take half a century for European powers to recoup and launch another major crusade against Edirne. As a result of the battle, the Ottoman political and military presence in the Balkans was secured.
Yeah.
In the following years, Bayezid ramped up his blockade on the Byzantine capital of Constantinople, as no support from Europe now dared to intervene in his military matters. In the next episode, we will go through the last years.
I think, looking at the map right there, you'd probably think that Constantinople would fall in the next, 1, 2, 3, 4 years, right? They've got no support. You're probably thinking to yourself, well, it's probably over for them. But you know what? They had a couple decades of holding out ahead of them.
Of the Thunderbolt's reign, as a new power in the east would come knocking on the gates of his sultanate.
Oh.
To ensure you don't miss that, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely.
Alrighty. And hey, if you enjoyed this video, please do the same thing here. Right? Leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon also, links down below. So, another interesting episode of Kings and Generals, Rise of the Ottoman Empire. As usual, we see more victories from the Ottomans, challenges, serious challenges, but a very major win in this one against these Crusader forces. Gives the Ottomans more of an opportunity to continue cementing the territories they already control and expanding their territorial control. So another good one. So I hope you guys all enjoyed this one. Hope you're all having a great day today, and I'll see you all again next time. Goodbye.